Right. So we are streaming. I'm still going to give it just another minute and a half to see as people join, and give myself time to open my PDF in the background. All right. Well, let's kick off. Let's see who can join us. Obese, keep strong on your LTE signal, because as soon as you drop, we're going to lose our quorum. Okay, so it is 4:03, and I'm going to call this meeting of the Grand County Planning Commission to order. We'll start to see if there's anybody who would like to comment during citizens to be heard. I don't see anybody currently attending who I think is here for that purpose. But if you are on YouTube and you'd like to join, we'll give it just a moment. And you're welcome to come and join us. Mallory, do we have anybody in the waiting room?
We do not.
All right, well, with that, we will move on to ex parte communications and disclosures. We have no public hearings on the agenda for today, but does anyone have any ex parte communications or anything to disclose about items on our agenda? All right, so we'll move on to approval of meetings for May 24th. Has everyone had a chance to review them, and are there any questions or concerns to raise for staff? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Okay, motion by OB to approve the minutes of May 24th. Is there a second? Seconded by Steve Efforts. Okay, any discussion? All in favor of approving the May 24th minutes, raise your hand, say aye. 4 of all 4 present commissioners vote, with 3 absent. And we will move on. Okay, so we are very lucky today because we have a new person attending our meeting. That is John Gunther, who's the new Director of Planning and Zoning here in Grand County. And so currently on our agenda, we have discussion items led by OB and County Commission updates and so on, followed by administrative staff reports. We'll still come back to the staff reports, but what we're going to do during this period of discussion is start by letting John talk to us a little bit about his priorities for his department, how he would like Planning Commission to, what role he sees Planning Commission playing in supporting him, and hearing from us on any perspectives that we have to support him and his office in their role. Then OB, we haven't had a chance to chat, but John had some thoughts around timing of the survey and making sure that we are aligning any public outreach to other priorities that he has slotted into his agenda for the next 6 months or so. So we can talk about how we see that fitting in and just making sure that we have that sort of a nice bow on the end of it before we move on. And last thing is this discussion block is I would love to talk about us coming together for a workshop. We can talk about the things that we might want to go through. And it's okay if we need to do it in hybrid, but more just like, let's leave today's meeting with a sense of what does an action-oriented approach look like for the next 2 to 3 meetings to make sure that we're positioning ourselves to support John, that we are aligned around priorities and we're not leaving anything behind. So that is the very high level umbrella that I'm proposing for that block. And then we'll go into our regular business as usual. And Josie has joined us. So we are now 5 of 7. And Josie, you didn't miss much. We approved the minutes and that's where we got. Cool. So OB, since this is slated to be driven by you, I'll start by just asking if there's anything not on that list you wanted to cover. Otherwise, maybe we can pass it on to John to introduce himself and kick off some discussion.
This list means that we're talking about the questions. Or did I miss something?
Nope, you're right. Questions of the survey, but given that John and his office are looking across sort of a wider altitude of things that the county wants to achieve.
Yes.
We might want to think about using that survey in a different way or timing it differently to align with some of these other
Right.
initiatives. So I wanted to just start by letting John introduce his thinking, and then we can have that talk about where that
sounds
fits in.
wonderful.
Perfect. All right. Hi, Rick. Nice to see you. You haven't missed much. We're about to meet John, the new planning and zoning director. So good timing. All right, John, we'll kick it off to you then. Oh, can't hear you though. That old song and dance. We're all used to it.
Thank you, Chairman. You can't read lips, huh? Okay. Thank you very much. So the reason Emily put this first on the agenda will be, I guess, I'm not sure, and Trish, I guess, is that you had some idea of putting forward this questionnaire. So I was going to introduce a couple of things. This is somewhat in the staff report already in the package. We'll kind of go through some of that a little later, hopefully. By the way, I'm here to serve you, not the other way around. So in case that could be misconstrued, I'm here at your beck and call. Anytime you need anything from us in our department, we might be a little stretched for resources right now, but the goal is to support the Planning Commission and its endeavors. So we have a couple of approaches. I've done this before. It's always different, of course, everywhere you go. So I'm not trying to take a template from somewhere else, other than I do have a bit of a strategy, and it might be a bit hasty to think that it's going to get done in 3 months, but that's the goal. The goal is to get the top-down full draft, redraft of the general plan done in 3 months. To do that, it's proposed that we hold off on the Spanish Valley survey and put it into context with a broader kind of survey and outreach, which would go to the whole county and probably part of the city. And I know there's been some benchmarks. Emily talked about this earlier around some data that has been gathered before. So it'd be somewhat similar to what you've been doing, only what I would suggest is that we take a countywide benchmark of data. There's pretty standardized surveys out there for this, and then to kind of tailor it to, say, what we call sector area plans or local area plans, which you could consider to be discrete neighborhoods or areas that may be larger than that, or conservation areas, those kinds of things. Although if you interview people in the conservation area, there won't be any people, it'll be all animals. So anyway, those characteristics can be somewhat defined as we go by. And now there's probably lots of historical data I'm not aware of, but that would be my best advice, is that we hold off on that, and not for too long. That's the goal, but for over the next 3 months. During that process, we'll be interviewing all the major decision makers. And I say major, I mean 25 to 30 decision makers in the county, sourcing strategic plans, currently what they're doing, what they're going through, things, the needs analysis, and then developing some high-level policies and objectives, and then tying those together comprehensively in a series of goals that would then be tied to outcomes and indicators with an implementation strategy. All the elements are in the matrix that I attached. You've probably seen these in comprehensive planning before. This is pretty standardized. There's not a lot of difference there. The only focus, I would say, that's job one, is public engagement. Those kinds of things tend to be missed for some strange reason in a lot of general plans. So public engagement, decision making, and the county strategic plan front and center. And then thinking about early, this is maybe a statement from Washington State, early and ongoing public engagement that comes in different forms and formats and can be delivered in many different ways. And that decision-making process will be framed in terms of what that looks like. That first step then would go into a public engagement phase after potentially the adoption of the general plan, both through Planning Commission and County Commission, into the public engagement phase, which would be launched by a series of surveys that would then go out to the public and start forming community associations, community groups, interested parties. There's lots of them here, of course. And then how those would tie together and kind of set the bigger ship a sail, which is actually taking a lot more at the grassroots approach. That takes a lot longer. That's going to take a year, I would say, at least, to go through the county, maybe less, and then to bring that back and re-inform the general plan. At the same time, we're going to take a look at the land use code and go through and redraft that in parallel with the general plan. So we're not leaving that alone. And at the same time, trying to catch up to the planning projects that we currently have that need attention, and workshops, including overnight accommodation that needs to be addressed, HDHO that needs to be addressed. And you have a list of things I think the Planning Commission does. So the goal is to develop your work plan as well, not ignore that. So hopefully that helps frame a way forward. And we're open, obviously, we're always open for comment. It's your show. We're here to put you on stage and make sure that the play goes on.
I would only say that, of course, it's interesting. I have actually no opposition to going in this form. I think Zachariah, last person who was kind of full-time as planning director, had actually thought doing some of the local plans like the 191, 313 corridor and the entrance corridor would, I better be careful here, might substitute for the general plan, or so it's a different strategy than we've been dealing with just recently, although many of us have participated not as members of the commission in general plans, but in general plans in general. So it's a turnaround.
Well,
But
we can do that at the same time. Sorry. Go ahead, Emily.
It's all you. Go for it.
So we could do that at the same time through the chair. I'm going to speak through the chair, but we can do that at the same time. We don't have to let those stall. They can be done, but they may not be as detailed as you're thinking potentially. Anyway, it doesn't ignore the fact that we need to do good land use planning and concept planning and sector area planning.
So what I like about this holistic approach is even when we were doing the most recent small area plan, we found places in our land use code that even didn't fully align to the most recent update of our general plan back in 2010. And it required of us to find ways of using our toolbox in somewhat rigid ways, somewhat inflexible ways that worked for that specific area and the resource protection area that we applied over it, but doesn't easily then translate to other areas of the county, which means that it's all kind of whack-a-mole to start to look at the challenges we're facing as a community holistically. That being said, I know, one, that outreach was a top priority. Steve, you raised outreach to developers. We've had outreach to public officials around water as a priority. So I don't want to delay outreach as a body if it's something that we think is important. There's been increased demand for development in Spanish Valley in particular. And so while I do think we want to look at things holistically, I also want to make sure that we have the tools and information we need to make decisions in the short term that align to long-term priorities, but also address short-term needs. And if there were any other outstanding questions that are still coming up that we're not addressing those. So what my ask to the group would be is everybody comfortable with hitting the pause button on this survey and any work behind it for a quarter? And if not, or if so, regardless, is there anything we do think that we need to pull up in order to make sure that we're not totally losing momentum or operating blind? So do we want to have a different type of survey out? Do we want to have something that's more passively available and so on? So I'll leave this as open discussion, but I'd love to leave with a decision as a body about timing and what comes next.
Well, I'd say I'm not opposed to taking a quarter off and giving this other a shot. But I also don't want to lose too much momentum. It's an area that's developing it is very important. And on our priority list, I think was one of the two top priorities, one of which we've done on the northern corridor. So 3 months doesn't sound bad to me.
Yeah, I feel fine putting it off for a quarter. Longer than that would make me nervous, just because I think Moab has a little bit of a catching up problem. Like I feel like we're always playing catch up to these things that are moving faster than we can. So I would be hesitant to push it off longer, but I think that's okay.
I echo OB and Maketa there.
I guess I'll go along with it also. I hate to lose, I know we can, from what John was saying, we can put all the questions in the survey that we've already devised. I guess we can put them in a later survey. And I don't know if your crystal ball says that there's a whole lot of decisions to be made about Spanish Valley right now anyhow, so.
Yeah, it's funny Rick mentioned a crystal ball because that's exactly my feeling is I wish I had a crystal ball for knowing what might actually come down the pike in the next 3 months. But I think as a body, we can hopefully be aware that this process is on the horizon in our decision making in the interim. I know I would be. So yeah, so I'm open.
Okay. John, I know you've only been in role for a handful of weeks at this point, and we did have a bit of backlog as far as work inside of the planning and zoning department. Have you had a chance at this point to get your head wrapped around what types of projects, nothing specific at this point, but what types of projects in maybe that Spanish Valley area we might anticipate within this period of time?
Not really.
Okay.
But that would be part of the workshop in July.
So I think this puts us in a good position to come together in July. So for maybe our not next meeting, but the meeting after, and we will make sure that everyone feels comfortable with the format, including looking into our IT technology and how it stands at this point. So we could do a remote format where everybody was able to participate inclusively. Here would be my recommendation, not assertion, just recommendation coming off this. So I think we postpone the survey. That being said, I would like to see us start to answer some of the questions of qualities that we had as a body. So maybe, we find the ability to put it passively on the website and see how people are responding or if people are getting confused, because there were some really meaty questions in there that I don't think it would harm trying to get some responses in. So whether it's, just put it on there and see how people respond. I'd like to explore that. So we can come back around to that in a moment. That we have a workshop in July, at which point we will have a better idea of the pipeline of projects that we will need to assess to make sure that we have the information we need to either recommend postponement on a decision or be able to take action in an informed way. I don't want to lose the overall intent around getting outreach either. So I know that with the work that the county in general and planning and zoning and specifically is doing on outreach in the next several months, we will have a chance to speak to more developers and to speak to more residents, younger, older residents, and so on. But I don't want to lose that opportunity either. So we can just keep it open about what sort of things we want to get feedback on and if the survey is going to be sufficient. But other things that have come up in front of us are water hardening and water scarcity, which we are all very much living at the forefront of this last week. Questions around economic diversity, and I know that we have Ben and Elaine on the call of us, so just staying close to the work happening there. I don't want to lose these things in pursuit of this larger general plan. And the last one is the land use code update. So even though we will look to the land use code in that 1-year timeline to make sure that we are amending it to map to the general plan work, we can also be assertive in areas like resource efficiency, water hardening, and then I don't know where HDHO expansion potential comes into all this, but Trisha, maybe you could update us. So I just spat a lot out there, but that's where my head is on this. So bullet points. Let's just talk about what getting the survey in the wild might look like. Let's make sure that we are not losing track around some of these other issues we've talked about. So maybe getting an update on the HDHO stuff from Trisha, and then just planning some in-person time for July, in-person hybrid time. And maybe we can talk about any topics that anyone would want to cover during that session. Cool. Anyone else have any thoughts? And then Trisha, I'll pass it to you, but I want to just hear from the body if anyone else thinks we're leaving anything on the table.
I don't know if this is particularly relevant, but just keeping in mind how just thinking about our water conversation that we had, this fire is going to impact that. And so just considering that down the road.
From a land use code perspective or just in general?
Sorry, I thought you were talking about priorities of things to keep in mind while we're moving forward.
Cool.
Yeah, just from our water conversation, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Cool. All right. All right. Anyone else?
Maybe I should elaborate a little more on my response before, where I basically said, yeah, I agree with them. While I know we really want to be timely with the Spanish Valley survey, in particular, how, just to direct how that area can be developed over the coming years. I do like the idea of really wrapping in the general plan into this and having that wider perspective, because I feel like just what I've seen from staff management, if you try to solicit information and you are just kind of all over the place, people get whiplashed, and then you've got this choice fatigue. And so I really like that we're stopping and just kind of pumping the brakes a little bit to really, solicit the input that we want, as opposed to overbearing people, and then it just kind of all gets lost in the mess. So still want to be timely, of course, but I do like this idea of pausing and getting that wider perspective.
All right.
And just,
Go ahead, Bob.
sorry, just a thought on pausing, of course. We can do it in many ways. I know in the 191 313 area, we literally said we couldn't make decisions at one point, and then did a little bit of a pause there to get that plan done. I don't think that there's going to be maybe anything like that on the Spanish Valley corridor, but I guess if there is, and we just don't think we have enough direction, there are mechanisms to get enough direction. So yeah, makes me more comfortable with the pause.
So 2 weeks from now, for our remaining June meeting, I think we target by then having a list of likely upcoming projects that we can review, and just make sure that there's no message we'd want to send forward to the county commission on any priorities there. So that's one takeaway. Then meeting in July. By then, John, with the work you're doing with decision makers and so on, hopefully we'll have a better sense of timing for some of these outstanding priorities. And we can do some workshopping on potential scenarios and prioritization, and even things we've seen from our research and our studies in other communities, or things related to the work that we're particularly concerned about.
If I could,
Go ahead.
If I could, Emily, getting feedback on it. So yeah, I mean, that's the point of the workshop, is actually to put our arms around objectives, shortcomings, issues that you find, specific ones, general ones, how those are being managed, how they fit into this framework. There's a bit of homework here, which we'll talk about later. So preparing for that's why we've left it till July rather than June. June's going to have a couple things on the agenda too. So we wanted to make sure we touch base with you first as we start moving ahead. In the meantime, we'll start interviewing after tomorrow with the county commission. We'll interview major decision makers, and you're some of them, of course, as we start moving ahead. So we'll have a good check-in, I think, in July, and I think a good healthy workshop around the needs in all of those areas. And then a prioritization exercise. I'm not sure if we get all that done in one workshop. It may take more than one, but at least we can check in. That makes sense.
Perfect. We'll save this for future considerations, but we can look at everyone's calendars and make sure we have a time selected by the time we break today. Trisha, just since we're on this topic, I don't want to jump ahead of the county commission update, but as it relates to the HDHO possible redevelopments or expansions, where does the county commission sit with that right now? Is that likely to come before us?
I don't think I can answer that question, but I can talk to Chris and Christina about that. Sorry. I mean, I have a little bit on my update about the HDHO, but it doesn't really go into answering that question.
Cool. So that's another thing. We'll have. All right.
I could jump in there, Emily, if you don't mind. I'm doing a bit of a decision tree, an algorithm on how HDOs are captured and approved, and where we currently, who's on first and who's on second. That's that kind of scenario. Also, we have some people knocking on the door, and you probably know some of them. I'm not going to say who they are right now, of course, because that's still coming forward. But and there's both a cap on number, and I think we're bumping up against the 2-year time frame. I don't know how artificial that was, and but that's one of the other questions too. So we do need to do some internal work around this before we present some options. But maybe commissions and this commission and the other commission are thinking through those already.
I just realized it's Monday afternoon and I'm saying HDHO the entire time, and I meant to say OAO. So you'll all have to forgive me that I had a case of the Mondays. So let me restate my question.
Oh,
I'm so sorry. I'm sitting here just plowing from one thing to the next, because I know that is an area of concern. No, I apologize. OAO, the overnight accommodation overlays. This is the one I was curious about. So currently, when we went through the process of overnight accommodation overlays, we addressed new developments and left closed for the moment potential redevelopment or expansion of overnight accommodations of all types. So I apologize for confusing everyone. But that's more my question, because that's an area that I know had been raised at a past county commission meeting and is one that is also pressing and potentially coming before us. And so that's a priority that I'm a little nervous about waiting 3 months to start to look at as a body. If it's something that we imagine will come before us in the form of applications or priorities handed down from county commission. So Trisha, I'm sorry, but if you wouldn't mind updating on that, I would love that, because that I think is one that we
Right. I'm going to give the same answer. I don't have an answer on that. And so I will look into that and get some information for you this week. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Okay. So with this, here's what I recommend to put a pin in this conversation. Next meeting, we will have a better sense of our backlog as a body, and that will help us make informed decisions about anything we want to send to county commission in the form of recommendations to postpone, or making sure that if there is something we want to hasten up, that we put that first. 2, we will have a workshop in July, either in person or in a hybrid form, which it sounds like John's going to sort of circle us back together in the staff report towards the end of the meeting. And I'd like to leave the future considerations portion of today's meeting with a set of potential times and dates on the calendar, if not a selected time and date. And we'll just keep the survey question open through the next couple of meetings about how to handle that. And if it's something we want to pull up sooner versus wait for 3 months, we can make that decision at a later time. There's nothing waiting on it at the moment. Cool. Anything there? Are we all good with kind of this small change of plans? Lovely. Okay. OB, anything that you need to keep yourself sort of, keeping the survey in a good spot, anything that you specifically wanted to make sure we didn't drop, just want to not leave
I think-
anything on the table.
I think as I read over the list of questions, maybe the water question just didn't get there. At least I didn't see it. So I'd put it back in. I do think at the very least, and I think maybe, I can't remember who brought it up last meeting. It might've been Steve. I mean, we need to, once we get this survey all up, we need to, of course, run it by 20 people, we'll say, to see that they can answer the questions and understand that, for their surveys to count, they'll have to take it again, whoever those guinea pigs are. But otherwise, I didn't see anything. I think Gary submitted yet another question that isn't there. And at some point we should look at that question as a body, but we can do that. It's just, those are details. It looks pretty good to me, the way it is, but we'll see when we have people practice it.
Perfect. Well, sounds like this is a good point to stop this discussion. And if there's no other points to raise, we will move on in our agenda. All right, Trish. So County Commission update.
Okay, thank you so much. So one of the things I want to state, that minutes from our last meeting, which was on the 1st of June, have not actually been, Quinn was not around, so we still don't have those minutes. And we won't be approving those minutes for tomorrow's meeting. So I'm kind of lacking, sorry, in that venue. So keep that in mind. Things that pertain to you, I think that you will find of interest. We did meet with UAC. There was probably 4 commissioners, and Chris and Christina met with UAC, the Utah Association of Counties. And I think that what was interesting there is, one, it was the CEO and a couple of their kind of head staff, and they actually stayed overnight for a couple nights. And they were fairly taken aback with the community, right? How busy we are, the UTV things. So I think that was great that they actually came and got a feel for our community and the issues that we're dealing with. Because I think we're really this outlier within the state, and I think that became quite clear to them, right? We're a rural community, but not really. Right. And so we're fighting issues that other rural communities are not. As far as Thompson goes, it's pretty cool. We're right in the midst of the cleanup. Actually, tomorrow is the last day. So we've been doing it since Thursday. I was out there on Thursday, and we have a steady stream of trash coming in. We're probably filling 4 to 5 30-yard dumpsters a day. And that includes a backhoe, compacting that trash. So hopefully we'll see a little difference in that community. And it's been pretty cool. Everybody who's worked out there has said it's great to see not only the cleanup, but actually people talking to each other, because that community is quite divided. And so I think it's cool to have that going on. So I really appreciate the county's efforts as far as that goes. The water board out there is now me. I am the only current member of the water board. We basically wiped the slate clean as far as the water board goes at the last county commission. And so we are now taking applications to rebuild that water board. And, my hope is that old water board members will apply again. It's just, Chris had found through old bylaws that water board was actually assembled inappropriately. They were just doing it by appointment, and it was supposed to be elections. And so we want to just get everything on board via their bylaws and move forward. Chris is in the process of getting that water survey through Sunrise Engineering up and running. And so hopefully we'll have an idea. Again, it's really interesting to just be in touch with that community. And half of the people I talk to are like, we have tons of water, and half feel the exact opposite. And so I think a engineered study will answer those questions. John is actually meeting. I went to a meeting at Groundwater and Sewer with Mark Stilson with the Division of Water Rights, and also so both Grand County and Spanish Valley were there. And John might have more information. I had to leave at a certain point. To me, what it seemed like came out of it is they're really concerned about three main areas: the wetlands, the golf course, and Kins Lake, and really having a firm grasp on the water resources that are coming into or going out of those areas. Having monitoring wells that are actual monitoring wells, and John might say this in a different way, but meaning right now a lot of their monitoring wells are simply old abandoned wells. So they actually want to get that really in place so that they have a firm grasp on our aquifers. John, do you want to add anything to that? You were at that meeting. You're muted.
I know I'm trying to unmute. It's not listening to me. So there's been some. Sarah has actually sent a couple emails. Trish, I'm not sure if you're in that loop or not, but there's going to be another follow-up meeting coming up here. I think one of the goals of the meeting was to actually put together a kind of a needs analysis and a draft RFP of what kinds of needs are there and how, as a group, we could move forward, including the commission and city council, or the city's decision makers too, because I think they had two separate meetings. So that was one thing I think and there's a follow-up meeting coming up here with a bit of a task force working on this too. So I think that was one of the objectives. And I've got a bit of a summary here. I could put that in the minutes if you'd like, of the meeting, if you're interested in that.
I think that would be awesome. Are you good with that, Emily?
I think that would be valuable to reference. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will move on. As you saw in the newspaper regarding HDHOs, Grand County Appeal Authority upheld the county commissioner's interpretation of the HDHO, in which that ordinance states that occupants and owners had to be from a qualifying household. And then we found out today, Christina told us that another one of those, the appeals authority upheld another one. So we had three of them slated. And that being said, the authority, he did find two provisions of the rules and regulations that were inconsistent with the original ordinance, and an amendment to those rules and regulations will be presented tomorrow at the county commission. And this really isn't my forte, so I'm kind of just giving you kind of notes. So if you have specific questions, I might not necessarily be the one to answer those questions. We need Christina here sometimes.
Yeah, I think we'll hold on any discussion of that. And if there's future discussions for the county attorney following the county commission meeting tomorrow, we can address that at our next meeting.
That'd be awesome. Okay, that would be great. I thought the other thing I would update you guys on is the fire. I think it's right in our face. So as of June 9th, and this is kind of just a little takeoff, but then I want to talk about a meeting I went to today. Obviously, severe drought that has persisted over, really, they're stating the last 90 years is what they're stating. Record heat, extreme fuel load, and steep terrain, historic challenges has led to a fire that is only 6% contained. As of this morning, 8,200 acres approximately. They have 8 helicopters, 32 engines, about 306 personnel on the fire. So this morning I went to, and that was just kind of the report from this morning prior to the other meeting that I went to. So we went to a meeting, Pack Creek Fire Cooperative. It was all of the agencies, the media, Grand County, San Juan County Sheriff. It was pretty disheartening. I got in the pickup and burst into tears. So high temperature, relative humidity that is extremely low. It's quite common at night in the mountains to get at a relative humidity of about 30%. They're getting like 15%. During the day, the relative humidity is in the single digits, 3 to 4%. Winds driven by terrain, high yes, it's just really, propelling this fire. They are expecting the state meteorologist was there and expected we'll get a slight cell moving in Thursday. But honestly, what he said is the worrisome part is it may be a thunderstorm and just produce more lightning. After that, there's basically an extended dry period of 14 days, just exceptional drought. As we know, there is a very high fuel load up there. It's specifically in kind of it's getting up in the higher country, just those north facing slopes that have high conifer loads, and it's just carrying those fires via slope and wind. At night, they're getting really high diurnal winds pushing down slope, and so it's really thwarting their efforts to fight it because they're worried about firefighters on the ground. As you may know, the fire crossed Geyser Pass last night, has moved into Burrow Pass and is wrapping around Haystack. They did find that the winds over Geyser Pass have relaxed a little bit as it's moving over and down the other side. As far as fighting it, they're still putting a pretty concentrated effort in Pack Creek, just making sure that the structures that are still there are taken care of, and building a pretty extensive fire line around that area. They're now looking extensively at building a fire line around all the structures that exist around Geyser Pass. Yeah, quite a few questions were asked, but one of the questions was, what are we looking at as far as time frame? And kind of consistent, the consensus from the Great Basin team that is here fighting the fire is weeks, if not months, of fighting that fire. And so it's not great. There is going to be a fire ban put in place, but not until June 18th. One of the things they're asking from everybody right now is obviously to be, diligent about fires on public lands, but also the concept, we've got a lot of people that are crossing those, the mountain is closed right now. They've closed everything down. They're letting some people in for evacuation purposes, but as far as the front side, they're now closing the back side. It's closed, but a lot of people are crossing those barriers. And so they're now then having to worry about civilians in those firefighting zones. So they're really asking everybody to stay out of that country, to just let firefighters fight.
As relates to that.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Go ahead, Emily.
Oh. Well,
you're not.
Do we find that the people who are crossing those lines tend to be people sort of just rubbernecking at the fire, or do we find that it's a choice of like, hey, I'm going to do this anyway? Like, I'm just curious what sort of.
I think it's people that are rubberneckers. I was into a number of people that wanted to actually, I was around the Blue Lake area, people that were climbing ridges to get up and over to look into Gold Basin. So they said it's just really, we got to keep people out of the mountains. So it's pretty devastating. One of the big things that I think is, people are, there's just a lot of hearsay about who started the fire. The person has been apprehended. None of that is true. There's investigative teams on board, but nothing has led to any kind of apprehension. I hope I said that word right. I don't know if I did, but they are taking any tips that people might have. So keep that in mind. So that's where we're at. It's really fairly grim.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. And for anyone watching, one other thing I saw called out was that our local fire department and people who have been displaced from their homes may be of need, but the federal firefighters are not in need of donations, and any attempts to try and get them donations could actually hamper their efforts. And so we should just be mindful of letting professionals do an extraordinary job.
Yeah, just on that, on that note, right now, as far as the Great Basin team that is fighting this, we are their number one priority. So they have a lot of resources. They're sending us a lot of resources. So.
All right. Well, I don't know how to respond to that. So we will move on, but thank you for the update, Trish. And hopefully the next update is more optimistic. Okay, so administration staff reports and updates, and there's some attachments towards the back of our packet that relates to this agenda item.
Okay, that's me, I guess. Okay, so one of the things I've done, I'm not sure if you get these on a regular basis. We ran a building permit report. I was kind of hoping we'll develop a dashboard that'll be online as well. So we'll actually show our projects, what's coming in, non-confidential, of course, with dollar values, type of construction, and the impact kind of on zoning and building. So over the last 3 months, since March 1st, is that 3 months? 1860 single family dwellings, some pretty significant. I don't have a dollar value here. And 24 miscellaneous, which includes everything from renovations to garages to workshops, accessory dwelling units, solar installations too. We can break some of these down. I'm sure if commission's used to seeing this kind of breakdown, but we will get better at doing that. And then we probably should provide a zoning report on a regular basis, not maybe every meeting, but at least once or once every couple of months on the status and what's going on, what the trends are and how they compare between this year and last year. That's what I'm used to commission being presented with. So I don't have that together right now, but the goal would be to actually show our current planning projects, our long range planning projects, what's going on, how that fits into kind of the housing opportunities and maybe even economic diversity. I'm sure Elaine would want to plug into some of that too. So,
John, on that note, I would be very curious to know a step below the sort of structural designation and to look at use to the extent that that can be reported on at a maybe quarterly or 6-month basis, because the use designation is a huge indicator of not just economic diversity, but economic density in certain areas within the county that I feel blind to, and also helping us understand for housing in particular types of housing, not just multifamily, single family, but how people are going to get to work and how people are cohabitating. To the extent that we can capture that data and report it would be useful for us to make policy decisions.
yeah, some of that, as you know, Emily's kind of hard to get at, some of that data, but we'll see what we can do. What I could try to promise for you is the next meeting that we'll have maybe a list of indicators or metrics that you might find interesting. And a lot of these are standardized to some extent, but there'll be some unique qualities here, no question about it. Okay, so that's kind of the building one. We do have some future projects that I've kind of outlined in the report. What I wanted to do, if it's okay with you, is launch into a bit of a discussion on the transportation master plan. As commission members will know, and those listening, transportation and land use are connected at the hip. You don't do one without doing the other. You can do them separately, but it's really in jeopardy unless they're connected. So, and I'll say this even though a lot of commission members already know it, transportation master planning, really the full length of a master plan takes a look at every single mobility opportunity that's there. It takes a look at the data that's currently there, how it can be gathered, both in terms of speed, weight, whether it's freight or light vehicles. I'm not sure if they can do an off-the-road calculation. I know when they put 2 tubes out there, they can do speed and weight. So it could be an off-road vehicle count there too. They also, one of the major goals is to take a look at forecasts. And I'm not sure if the commission's ever seen a synchro model where they run these on video, basically through a program that takes a look at the impacts over various lengths of time. In this case, I think they're looking at 5, 10, and 30 years, I believe, or 5, 10, and 15. So that's hitting the general plan horizon of 20 years. What they sometimes don't do is what they should do is take a look at a good land use strategy so that those forecasts can be a little bit more grounded. It's still speculate. It is a crystal ball, like somebody said before, but it tends to be somewhat speculative if you don't have anything from long range land use perspective too. And there's some hidden numbers there, hidden metrics, and as far as tourism is concerned. So you need to tie into a lot of what's currently happening and what those trends look like. So this plan does some of that. It doesn't do all of it. And one of the things that we've shifted around, and I was going to point this out, I don't know if you've got your document open, but I've got a paper version of it in front of me. And so on page 3, which is task 4, we've made a couple of changes to the scope. I tried to take some things and redo them, but I couldn't get very far with some of it. So, but we've got a couple of things that we've added. One's called a level of service analysis, which actually takes a look at how roads are classified. And in the county roads, you usually have major arterials, major collectors and arterials, those kinds of classifications, and local access roads. And you classify those based on the actual function of the road itself. And then you start forecasting what those roads look like. So a level of service analysis looks at also tying that into infrastructure, water, sewer, and stormwater primarily, so that you start taking a look at tying all of those things together in a general planning exercise. So this reinforms the general plan, if that makes sense. I'll stop there actually and just ask if that does make sense. That's one thing we've added here, is a level of service analysis over time. And if you know, when you do a road classification, it's treated like a report card. An A class usually means there's hardly anybody on the road. In other words, the roads are over designed. A B is getting a little better as far as roads, but and still easy movement. A C is usually where you're designed for. A D usually means you're approaching a failure, and E and F are usually failures. Usually failures do not occur in straight sections. They occur where there are signalization or at intersections or left turn movements or poor stacking effect. So, and I'm speaking traffic right now, transportation, not necessarily bikes and other forms of mobility, public transit. All of that gets tied into this too. So that road classification system will hopefully be implemented as part of this, and then hopefully our goal is to link that to land use. So this would be an important reference for us as we start moving ahead with the general plan. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions about that.
I'm trying not to get caught too far into the world of sunk costs, but I know that at least along the Spanish Valley Drive corridor, the existing plans are to develop a multi-use sidewalk trail system through individual developments. So, you know, each time a new development on the road frontage happens, we use it as an opportunity to invest. I'm just curious how something like this may change that. Like, what might we anticipate changing from what exists today based off of a study like this?
Well, this should integrate all of that. It should integrate a full trail network. A master plan actually does exactly that. It takes a look at land, sea, and water in all forms of multimodal transportation. I don't think the airport's counted in here. I would have counted it in. And when I say recreational, water access is not so much freight access to the river, but it's recreational access. And that's still an important facet. It's not counted here yet. It's one of those things to think about. And then the whole trail network and how that's connected, both in terms of economic nodes, public transit drop-offs. Those tend to be economic nodes as well, as far as mobility on trails is concerned. And I don't know if we have a lot of horses. Do we have equestrian here?
Mm-hmm. Out south we do.
Yeah, so that would be another one that you would want to not just motorized, but also non-motorized.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a good answer to your question. It probably should be more integrated than it currently is in the proposal. So it's one of those things we're going to have to work through for sure. And in that light, we are recommending that we have a planning commission member, at least, if not on a steering committee, at least part of our technical review committee, just to kind of tap into some of the things that are happening. So I need to make sure that that's where we want to go, because this is a joint city-county project and very important, of course. So it'll be important, I think, to have a commission member that we can use as a touchstone and not take up too much of their time.
Steve, when we were discussing priorities, I know you had raised alternative routes, pedestrian routes and so on. Is that something you would be interested in serving on?
Yeah, my ears perked up a little bit there, so could get a little more insight into what that all entails, but certainly interested.
Well, can I tentatively appoint you as the representative and you come back and tell us if it's not something you want to take on, and then we can reassess?
You're good at what you do. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, the other part that was an important one to identify, I think, is on page 4. We inserted a statement here. I didn't go as far as I wanted it to. In my view, and I've said this to Chuck and to Bill, it's our job to do public engagement. It's the administrative job with commissions to be on the pointy end of the spear. The point of that is that you're actually out there to actually make sure you've got momentum, you're documenting, you've got a historical reference there, and there's a continuity that goes into the future. We tend to defer too much to planning consultants or consultants to take that role on without leading it. In my view, it's always better to take it on from a community perspective. Vendors love that because it can be a black box for costs, and it can have like no beginning and no end kind of thing. So we did get a statement here that says, to clarify roles, the city and county will help facilitate public outreach, assist in developing stakeholder and contact database, helping to decide on meeting formats, and assisting in documenting and recording feedback. So this is usually a win-win statement for everyone, for a vendor. And not only that, you start to build those resources and build the relationships. You tend to be on the forefront of that as a plan, in planning and zoning, but that's where we belong. And I think it's a really important place to be. Now, I backed off a bit because I had more in it than that, but I think I came in at a late stage here. Sorry for the noise in the background here. So I leave my door open all the time. So anyway, we've got some traction here, and we talked to the vendor last week, and they agreed wholeheartedly. So we'll see how this plays out. I think there should be a good objective to make sure that we got public engagement as part of more of a county city enterprise than just a vendor enterprise. So those are the two highlights I wanted to make of the plan. We actually sent the contract back in its format to the vendor today, and we'll hopefully have it before the county commission here in July, first meeting in July.
Well, this is fabulous. Are there any questions for John as relates to this particular agenda item? Just a question more generally, and I know we have some members of our economic diversification and board here. As it relates to traffic and transportation in general, there's obviously questions around nodes and development, transit-oriented development, and so on. But I keep coming back to the fundamental issue that's plaguing our community, which is housing, and transportation is a component to that, because a lack of reliable and affordable transportation makes housing much less attainable, because it makes it more difficult for people to live far from the city center. Is that a component of this study that, I mean, I read through it, but I just wasn't sure how much of that might be addressed with this work, or if we would need a separate, well, I guess I'll just stop there. Like, how much does that fold into this work?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, that's a land use question. Maybe, Emily, you're asking more the zoning question, which of course is more of a current question. So what's currently entitled? How is that going to generate traffic numbers or different types of mobility options? That should be part of the plan. That is part of the plan. How you project that, though, from a land use perspective over a longer period of time is the challenge. That is the challenge, because you really need to have a good land use plan in place, and I don't think we do. before you really get a good functional long-range plan on
Mhm.
transportation.
Anyone else?
Only a thought. I know when I was in Eugene, vehicle miles traveled was a big deal, of course, 'cause that had to do not only with economics of driving, but of course, traffic. And I guess you would say that's really in many ways a land use issue also.
Yeah, it's vehicle trips per type of use. So both commercial, residential, multifamily, residential density. That's an important part of those numbers too. And VMT, yeah, vehicle miles traveled. Those are two important metrics. So we can chart all of that, put that together. But if you really do it just on a current planning perspective, it's not a master plan. It's not a long range plan. It's a current plan. It's a snapshot.
Well, I'm eager to sit down and talk through this amongst other priorities in a little bit more depth and to better understand how they intersect. Because I'll be honest, where my brain is firing is there's so much to do and there's not enough time and it all needs to be done now. So, but I know things related to this, such as parking requirements has come up in past applications. Obviously, non-motorized trails and access, and then of course, personally, more affordable and attainable transportation options is a very top priority for me. So I'm eager to dive into this more.
And
What-
Emily, you know, there's a public transit study that's going on right now as far as different types of use. So that's happening at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's so good. And I guess, you know, the fear is is what do we do now? Because there's so much I want to know before taking or like asserting an opinion on direction on some big items right now in front of us. Okay, John, anything else that you need from this body in the short term or that we can help staff with to keep these priorities rolling ahead of our planned workshop next month?
Well, I've got some homework for you coming up because this is just old business. The transportation master plan you've been discussing for some time, I think, because it was in the minutes. And then there's a couple of status questions here for old business. And then the overnight accommodation workshop. Those are both old business. And then we'll launch into new business.
New business it is. Hello, Garish. Okay. 5:05, we'll just note that Garish joined the meeting. Okay, we are all here. Think we are ready to launch into new business, John?
Okay, well, let me just go over the last two. You had two rezonings on the docket last time in Thompson Springs from Jamie Rourke. Jamie stopped in here with his daughter last week. Nice guy, by the way. So anyway, those have not gone to the county commission. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. So I just touched base with Christina today just to see where it's at, see whether there's a desire to put this forward to the commission, because obviously there's restraint here that has to do with water supply. So we're getting that feedback right now, just to let you know. So we're waiting we'll be approaching the applicant just to see if they want to carry it forward in its current frame or form and potentially face a denial based on the current water supply, or at least a condition of approval of some kind. So that's where that's at, in case you're wondering. The overnight accommodation overlay workshop, you have that in old business too. So I guess I'm looking for some direction on how you want to proceed. I would like to suggest, you did have two commission members on the bit of a task force working with the county commission, I believe. And the goal was to have a joint workshop. So I'm not sure if Trish has any updates on that.
So
Or you
just to
wanna-
clarify, we weren't certain how the county commission wanted to proceed. And so we preemptively asked two members of the planning commission to serve on that workshop if the county commission was open to that being a multi-body workshop. And I don't know where that sits.
My memory is I asked Chris and he was totally down with that. And I believe it was Opie and Josie, is that correct? And did he reach, did he reach out to you guys? I can't remember. But he is receptive to that, and so that's kind of where it is. And that's something I can check in on, sorry, and get a date on where I went on that.
Perfect. All right, so we'll get an update on that at our next meeting. But glad to hear that they are open to that, to working on that together. I think that's good.
Okay. You want me to proceed, Emily?
Any questions anyone has before we go forward? All right,
Okay, the next decision has to do with forming a steering committee that will take a look at developing the next steps. And I put it as an attachment in your package. I'm sorry for the length of the packet. I don't know. Most people don't run copies of these anymore. They read it off the screen. So it's not very graphical, although I did include a graphic here. I don't know if you've looked at it, because you always want pictures of some kind, with a bit of a flow chart showing a reference point between strategic planning, general planning, master planning, the annual budget, open houses, workshops, and master plans. This is a kind of a tool I've used in the past before. The strategic plans are roughly a 20-year horizon. That'd be a strategic plan, obviously, for the county commission, but it can include other elected officials too. A 20-year horizon usually where the general plan fits in. So they're almost connected together in a lot of ways because they have the same kinds of reference points. What I've done in BFAT past is actually taken the strategic plan, especially if it's well developed. There's no point in taking an undeveloped strategic plan and putting it in the general plan, and then meshed it right in the beginning of the general plan. That helps you kind of clarify the long range objectives of the commission and the county. And then master planning, like the transportation master plan, starts to re-inform the general plan as they're developed, and that's usually a 3 to 5 year horizon. And then the annual budget. Now, as you probably know, in long range planning, there's no money assigned to any of this. It's a wish. We're dreaming. And every municipality needs to dream. And it's good to dream together. So although there'll be different dreams there, those voices, if they're heard and can be heard, usually try to collect those into a collective voice and put that together in text as well as graphics to kind of express those policies in a coherent, measurable fashion. So that's the goal of doing the general plan, and then reinforming it with master planning and studies, of course, that are there. So I think we've got a ways to go here. We've got a bit of a mountain to climb in a short period of time to get a general plan that's in fairly good shape that we all could agree on. We're not going to end up with a B+ or an A+ here. Sorry to say. We'll end up with something that's acceptable. C, maybe a B-. I know that's not acceptable for a lot of people that are academics, but that's kind of where a lot of these plans fit, and then you just get better as time goes by. I don't know if that makes sense or not. And then I was going to talk about the two phases that we just went over, and then request a commission member, another one, to be appointed to the steering committee that would help guide the general plan update.
John, I've got a question for you. I'm Garish Willis. So what we have is a general plan, and we have a future land use, what's it called? Future land use plan as it's part of it. Have you had a chance to review that? I'm a little concerned that our terminology may not be together here. So the future plan is kind of a visioning, and it went through a public process about 10 years ago, which probably, and we've recognized that it needs to be updated. So are we talking the same language here, the same plans, or is there something different?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Garish, what you're referring to. Through the chair, sorry. I'm not sure what you're referring to, but the general plan does house future land use plans.
Yes.
But it also houses a resource management plan, which is required by the state. As you probably know, it houses elements of the transportation plan, and it also houses a fiscal impact analysis. Those are you've got pieces of a comprehensive plan, but you don't have all the elements. And comprehensive, as you probably know, a general plan, if it's not comprehensive, the pieces aren't working together, it's not comprehensive. It's a bunch of silos, and that's what you have.
Okay, fair enough. So you've looked at it, so that's your assessment of where we're sitting now. That's good.
No, it's a fact. It's a fact. You got a lot of general plans are like that. A lot of general plans just work as silos. They just kind of patch pieces together. So you're absolutely right, though. The future land use map is the long range component of where you want to go, what you want to dream of, what you want to see as development occurs over time. It's not an entitlement. It's not the land. It's not the zoning. Zoning's different. Zoning's current. It is a wish list of what you want to see, and you can do so much of that without informing. I'm not going to say this properly. Without involving every single landowner, because really it's up to the decision makers to think of how those pieces go. And obviously that's a public exercise. I'm not saying that, but it's you can do a lot of that without all of the litigation that goes along with zoning.
So John, I guess my question is about, you mentioned strategic planning and the strategic plan. So I'm trying to see in your mind, I'm okay with it. I'm trying to figure out in your mind, where does the strategic plan fit along with the general plan and the components of that, which are the future land use portion?
Okay, so normally in a strategic plan, Garish, you would have the very top level statement. You know what that's called?
It's probably a vision.
A vision statement or mission statement, yeah. So what is the mission statement for the county?
The vision statement so far has been the more tourists, the better.
Yeah. Is that where you want to be in 20 years? Is more tourists, the better?
Eventually, I think everybody's going to recognize that maybe there is a carrying capacity and we have exceeded it, but there are a lot of people that aren't quite there yet.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry. I think there are some people who still deny that there is a human carrying capacity for a landscape. And even if they agree that there is a capacity limit, they don't think we're there yet. So within our community, there's not agreement as to that aspect of strategic planning.
Should there be, though? I guess that's the question. Should there be amongst decision makers, elected officials, around a mission statement and objectives and measurable outcomes? And that's really the question. I mean, it's not something that should change every year. It's not something you change every 5 years. It should be something that will stand the test of time. And I know that's not easy, just saying that. That's what the county strategic plan should talk to. And I think that if you talk to most elected officials, or even appointed as well as you will probably want to say, this is what our mission is.
I think this has been the biggest hole in our planning efforts of the last 3 or 4 years, even. When we were assessing where the community wanted to be during the moratorium of overnight accommodations, I recall several public meetings where we would say, where do we want to go? And you'd hear complaint, you'd hear complaint, you'd hear complaint. Great, what do we want to be? Complaint, complaint, complaint. But never having found that why as a community, why do we exist? Why are we doing this? Why are we going in this direction? Means that every single planning process, long-term planning process, is a battle or it's a conflict versus an opportunity for us to find common strategy in a way that reflects the community. So I think that this is fabulous. I do think one of the challenges that we face in the community is that there is a large degree to which we have lost, or maybe we never had the autonomy to define for ourselves, whether that is a chosen reliance followed by a forced reliance on an industry that is very much defined by people who visit, or it's a sort of the natural byproduct of the way our community interacts with the state. I'm very curious to see how we pass that point, because I think that is the biggest risk that I see to this exercise. But I'm not going to say that in a way that I feel undermines the opportunity or the likelihood of success.
I'd only say with Garish's use of the word carrying capacity, and John, I don't know where it goes. I think there are probably limits due to water. We're going to find out more and more about it, but it looks that way. It looks like, I'll just make it up, a doubling of the population in Spanish Valley might well be too much, maybe even a 40% increase. I don't know if that goes, and I'd be very curious from your point of view, if that were the case, and if people agreed to it, is it something that goes in a mission statement or a vision statement, or where does it go in a strategic plan?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that you need to constrain in a mission statement. You do dream as much as you can, but you have to make sure that those cumulative impacts are part of that mission statement. And every one of us lives our life, I think, somewhat like that. So really, a community is a living organism and needs to think in terms of its long-range plan in real terms, not in just pie in the sky terms.
Well, I will ask that we keep moving on and make this a continued topic of discussion, especially going into our workshop. But let's go ahead and move on in the conversation. John, it sounds like you have some homework for us and you may have an ask for us.
Okay, and then I know she's always moving things ahead. That's good to have a strong chair like that. So let me throw something else in there. There would be a proposal to the commission, I would say, Trish, that they develop a strategic plan over the next shorter period of time. I'm not sure if that's on your radar, but I'll just ask the question rhetorically and just say that that's probably something that should happen because it really helps the general plan exercise. Yeah, so I'm just going to read through phase 1 of the general plan land use code adoption and the 4 kind of points. It's to identify strategic and work plans from each department and reference group, record current and long-range objectives and outcomes, shortcomings and plans, including text, graphics, and policies. So what is currently on the ground? A gap analysis will outline a holistic but high-level general plan and point to important land use code changes. A general plan update and land use code outline will be presented to the county planning commissions in October for consideration with public hearings and adoption. So a bit ambitious. Interviews of each decision maker will be conducted over the next 30 to 60 days and a draft update to the general plan created for public review in September. So on the steering committee, we're looking to have 13 members. I tried to manage this as best we could. 13 might be a bit large, but so county commission, planning commission, administration, economic development, parks and rec, sheriff, the fire, EMS, health, housing, legal, airport, and the roads. I don't know if you want to comment on any of that. I mean, you can do that now. That's part of the workshop, really, is because the steering committee formation will happen over the next couple of weeks or 3 weeks here, and we can always make amendments to this later. So the steering committee objectives: internal and external policy consistency, regulatory consistency and pertinence, engagement strategies, phasing and timing, reporting indicators and outcomes, and review and adoption schedules. So not much, really. Pretty easy job. And you get all the perks because we always bring food. We must have food. It's hard to do virtual food though, that's only
John, during today's meeting, do you need an appointment or can this wait and people can think about it and we can do that at our next meeting?
Yeah, we can do that.
Wait, okay. So what I'll ask of everybody is if you are interested in serving, just send me an email, keeping in mind the time commitment, and depending on the interest, we'll determine that at our next meeting. Does that sound good? Perfect. Well, I am excited. I think
Okay.
this is great.
In your hand, this will be, it's too bad the camera doesn't do a better job of this, but in your hand, you've got a matrix that looks like those 2 pages. Along the top of the matrix, so along the top part here, oh, very good, very good, Emily. Okay, along the top part are the elements, every element. In fact, the last one should have been in there. Last one's finance, which is blank. For some strange reason, that got blanked. So land use, as Gareth just mentioned, land use is an important element. Economic, environment, social, and it runs through the whole gamut across the top. There's I think 8 elements altogether that should be around there. So, and at the top part of the matrix are all the studies, proposed studies, and in a format. So if it's a straight lined one, it's been adopted. If it's italics, it's in process. And if it's italics bold, it's proposed. Now these are me putting this together. Really needs you weighing in on whether these things work. I took some of this from your from a previous planning commission kind of action steps around general planning and long range planning. So as I mentioned before, the top part are master plans and studies. The bottom part, and this goes over the second page, are decision makers and how those decisions are made. So if you look on the bottom part, it'll say lead groups, committees, and partners. So that's part of that decision making. So this really are all the components that would go into a functional, comprehensive general plan. And if there's something missing, let me know, because I know I don't always capture all of it, but it's an exercise that we've done many times in the past. So decision making is a big part of it. Public safety, transportation, parks and rec, utilities and infrastructure. The environment's a big one. Social is a big one. Economics a big one. There's all of these were big ones actually. Finance tends to be left for last for some strange reason, and decision making tends to be left for last. So your homework would be to go through this, take a look at it, and see where the gaps are. And this is really the backbone of the workshop, is taking a look at what we have on the list, as big a list as you want to make it, and then to prioritize that list.
I have a tactical question that is beneath this level, but maybe relates to this. There is a particular issue that has come up over and over and over again, and that is the issue of split zoning along the highway. And we also have some on Cane Creek Boulevard. I'm just, like I said, it's more tactical than this level, but what is your thought on how easily reassessing some of our anomalies such as that could map into this work versus making that its own track of work that we prioritize?
Yeah, what you'd want to do is take something like that's not working on the ground. There's kind of 3 aspects of land use planning. There's the long range 20-year land use plan. There's the current zoning, and then there's mapping what's on the ground, which is that's the fundamental functional, as you say, tactical exercise. We actually go out and do that. I don't think we have that. Do we have something that actually shows what's on the ground? Because then you start seeing the gaps. You start seeing what do you currently have? What's the current entitlement? And what's the long range objectives? And with that,
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And that starts to map the gap, those kinds of things. So for example, we've done community-wide, we've done strip annexation where you can run down the highway and then broaden it out to the university. Really bad planning policy, really bad. Leapfrog development, that's called a form of leapfrog, but you're actually doing strip annexation. At least you're connecting it with a road or something, whatever you want to connect it with. Leapfrog just says, we're not even going to connect it with a road. We're just going to start, dotting these things in. The other one, and that's a form of spot zoning. And then split zoning is another bad one too. And then you end up with these county islands sometimes too as well. And Castle Valley would consider themselves an island, or something that's surrounded. Something that's kind of working in the middle, but it's surrounded by dysfunction. I'm not sure if that exists here or not. So you can take those kinds of things and deductively start talking about how they could be managed and changed over time. That's really what land use is about.
Yeah.
Anything that's incompatible, where you've got heavy industrial use next to a residential use, that'd be very incompatible. You know, airports tend to be crowded out, so you want to make sure you protect the airport. You know, transportation corridors, those kinds of things, you want to make sure that they're focused. The other big thing that's normally there is you try to focus development where services are, not where they aren't. So that's a growth management strategy. That's a good vision statement to think about how growth management, it's not easy to do, but to think where growth should occur and where it should not occur.
So before our next meeting, if everyone can take some time to read through, and I know we're not all the way through the packet, but if everyone can take some time to read through this, we will spend time together / hybrid together at our workshop in July, at which point we'll dive deeper into this matrix. So we won't spend time at our next meeting going deep into what we would or would not like to see on here. What I do think would be useful is if there are any questions, if there is any clarification, if there is anything as part of this broader planning work that staff has put together that you think is missing or is superfluous or we need more detail, let's just make sure that we are touching on that in our next meeting. And then the longer term homework is to start to think through what is missing here, and we can discuss that in person. Does that sound good? Okay.
If I could add to that, Emily, there's 5 open-ended questions here which are worthy of consideration. If you feel in the workshop, you might want to add to these or change them around. One is discussion regarding planning actions and relationships that we just went over. What regional planning strategies are working and not working. So what happens regionally? Because as we know, the river doesn't stop at the boundary. Neither does the sky stop at the boundary. Neither does the land stop at the boundary. The boundaries are somewhat artificial, aren't they? Within elements of the general plan, list them. Let's see attached matrix, what needs to change. What are your comments regarding the following element considerations in the general plan: public engagement, community strategies, and the county strategic plan? Does that mean anything to you? Does it matter to you? Garish kind of touched on that already. Very good. You're very good at that, Emma. Implementation indicators, any metrics that should be counted. I've got a list of metrics that we can bring to the workshop to go over. It's pretty exhaustive, but I'll bring some of that. And what is a realistic timetable for the planning and zoning work plans? And there's a lot of things in the work plan.
I'm muted. Any remaining questions? Great. Well, it's very comprehensive and it's very refreshing. And I'm sure to a degree it's very overwhelming. Or maybe that's just me. But no, thank you, John, for preparing. Thank you, John, for preparing this. I know you have your hands full as you ramp up your role and ramp up in the department, but I'm sure if anybody has any questions in the meantime, reach out to you.
Yeah, and if I could just put something in there just so that we're grounded. I know it's easy in life not to look to the horizon. We don't look to the horizon very often and think, what does this look like in the long range? We're usually looking at the ground in front of us so we don't trip. But I think without looking at the horizon, it's hard to realize where you're going. I'm kind of wired that way. I don't know why, but I like strategic planning. But for some people, it's just too much. It's overwhelming. It has too much high objectives that don't seem like they'll ever be achieved. So I would just, ask you to think through this. And if you feel that way, that's okay. It's just that this is one of those things that a general plan, it really needs to be functional. It needs to have outcomes in it too. It needs to be implementable. It needs to have things that we can use on a regular basis, both from an administrative perspective and a legislative perspective. So it's really an important exercise. And we have a lot of general plans to sit around on shelves. And so that's the goal, is to make sure this is workable.
Garish?
So we've talked about the need to revise our general plan. It's come up many times in the last few years. A concern I have about the focus on a strategic plan is that what makes sense to come first? Because we've got real needs to to come up with a freshened up general plan. And having worked on a strategic plan for a small nonprofit in Moab, I know it's very time consuming just to do that. So from my perspective, I'm wondering if jumping into a general plan revision might not need to happen just because the need is greater. So I'm just throwing that out to the group as a perspective that may be a little bit different than where it looks like this might be headed.
If I can maybe, because I see your point. I also know that having been involved in the general plan process a decade ago, not much has come from it. And if we only revise something without looking at that which surrounds it or where it's pointing, it just becomes, it doesn't become useful. It's not actionable. And we've had this raised in our meetings. We've had people on two sides of an issue use the general plan to try to make their point, because the general plan is disconnected from the current state of the community and disconnected from the land use code. And we don't have a larger why and a larger vision. And where we have very substantial disagreements across our community, from resident to resident and neighbor to neighbor, I think that might point to the fact that as a community, we've never said this is where we want to go together. And there is not everyone's always going to look at the stars and think it needs to align the same way. But if we say this is what we want to be, it's a lot easier to become. I mean, easier is relative, but it's that which then comes out of it in a general plan and in a land use code and in actionable area plans and so on reflects an alignment that the policy then points towards that alignment versus trying to always get alignment at the policy level, which is what has disturbed our ability to be successful in the past. So I do think that there's always trade-offs between these different approaches. But right now, if you ask 10 people on the street, what should Moab be? You'd get 15 different answers. And we see that in interviews in the Moab Sun as people get answer questions. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal about Moab just the other day, and you had two very different opinions and perspectives, as well as visitor perspectives represented just in one article. So I think that I hear your point, but I just think that at the time now is the moonshot time, because we are going to lose our ability to define ourselves in the first place and to own that definition as a community. And so I don't mean to get too lofty, but I really do think that this is the right approach.
If I could just jump in there too, Emily, I think Garish has got a good point. That is, we don't do this in exclusion of current planning and projects. I'm not sure what you've got on your mind. I'm sure you've got a lot on your mind, Garish. And we don't want to ignore that. And so there's an inductive process to this. It's not just deductive. So the idea is to take those things that aren't working and make sure they're represented, and not just in the long range, but also in the development regulations in the land use code. So, and it's doing those in context. That's what I'm saying. You can do both at the same time. The land use code doesn't have to wait completely for the general plan. We can do them both. We have a list. You have a list on the land use code. I've got a short list. You probably have a long list. And so we do that at the same time. That's part of the workshop, really. That's part of the exercise, is thinking through implementation, which is a big component. It's not listed in the list in that matrix, but it's the follow through from what's there. So that'll come out in the workshop, I think, what you're saying, hopefully.
OB, were you trying to?
Oh, I was only thinking, I like the idea of metrics. That is, and them being reported and taken seriously. Metrics such as what's the affordability of housing, which Zachariah had a fair amount of it for the community, and how many houses were lacking given how much people actually earned. Another one is Gary knows about. He probably helped attach it. The number of I don't know. It was something like the number of hotel rooms or rental rooms that there are in terms of a ratio to the number of housing units that are actually used by current residents and stuff, its primary residents. So I like the idea of metrics, having them referred to, and if they maybe were in a general plan or a strategic plan, people would pay more attention to them.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Reporting them on a regular basis, semi-annual, annual basis, and then reporting out and saying, what are we doing and what needs to be done? How do we fill those gaps? That data is so important because we end up with these passionate arguments with no data sometimes, and it's so anecdotal. I mean, stories are nice, but it's nice to have a story that's got some accuracy.
Well, let's do this. John, was there anything else on the staff report that you wanted to go through in the?
No, I think that's it. I think I'm going to bring a group of metrics here. Obviously, you're telling me a lot of things I don't know, and I'm not sure exactly what metrics background there are. So that'll be an important wake-up call. Hopefully, I'll get some research done before that.
Well, and I know we lost Elaine and Ben, but I had been peppering Ben for questions around the economy, so they're
Right.
good for us as well. Okay, well, let's do this. Any other questions for John before we move on? Otherwise, we'll move into future considerations.
Just one quick one. Could we get maybe a link or a file of the matrix that you have? So that way we can get in there and kind of tamper with a safe version that we won't, mess anything up.
The template's hard to fool around with, Steve. It just every time I mess with it, it gets messed up. But you're welcome to have it. Yeah, no, it's easy. It's in Word. I can send it to you.
Okay,
Sure.
much appreciated. Thanks.
All right. So just to put a cap on that conversation, if you would like to be a part of the steering committee, think about that. Let me know. Send me an email before 2 weeks from now. Take a look through the packet, begin to think about any questions or clarifications ahead of our next meeting. And then at our workshop, we'll dive more deep into what is missing, what other problems, and what are the challenges in our community that we think need to be addressed. Is this larger holistic process? And let's make sure that they are being addressed by these proposed pieces, or if not, make sure that they are then added. I want to look at dates for a workshop. So our first meeting in July is the 5th, and I realize that's the Monday after the July 4th weekend. So everybody got back in touch with me, I think, as far as comfort with meeting in person. And I realize that the county is not doing this yet, so we will still play that by ear, but ideally we will do this in a hybrid fashion with ample social distancing and the requisite precautions, with the option to be hybrid. And I've got some really great workshopping software that I use with my remote team. So I'm positive that we can make that an inclusive experience. How does everybody feel about doing that ahead of our Monday meeting, either as a morning thing and then we have our Monday evening meeting, or doing it in the 2 hours ahead of time? I don't know how much time we think we would need for this. All of our public hearings are after the 5 o'clock hour. So that 4 to 5 block is sort of open to us too, if we want to build on top of that.
It looks like in July, we have the same problem we had in June, which is the first Monday of the month is the 5th.
Oh, you're right. So we're the 12th and the 26th.
And there's a complication that county employees like John will be celebrating the 4th of July as a holiday. And I'd hate to bring him in for a meeting. So what if we plan on something with the next Monday being the target date that we want to maybe have a meeting before or something?
So we don't have to make a final decision today, but can anyone think of any conflicts on the 12th?
Yeah, I won't be there. I'll be out of town.
Okay. Well, tell you what, instead of trying to do this live on our video, we've got, so the 12th and the 26th, then we're the 2nd and 4th. So the 12th and the 26th are our Mondays. Let's try and find something in that window, ideally earlier in the month. If we need to do one off our normal meeting schedule, if anyone just send me an email with their availability in July, and I'll help coordinate some dates, and we'll make sure that we get one selected before our next meeting. Does that sound good for everybody? Perfect.
And Emily, I just threw this out to John today. You know, USU has a great meeting room with the broadcast capabilities with all the microphones. I'm just kind of throwing that out. Anyways,
No, that's a great idea.
so
That's wonderful. All right. Whew. Between scheduling and everything else. Okay, so
just
we'll get that settled over
checking
email.
checking in with you, Emily. You don't think that we could just take one of the July 12th Planning Commission meeting and make it a workshop?
Let's make sure we wouldn't have anything on the docket that got pushed back that would affect the public. So I just want to, I wouldn't want to push back any public hearings to accommodate that meeting. So, so that's one possibility. But let's look at the schedule and let's look at people's availability and make a decision off of that.
Yeah, maybe starting a bit earlier and then starting the commission business later, something.
Yeah, I think that could work. But the maquette is not going to be around on the 12th. So let's just get everybody's schedules generally. Let's try Monday and Tuesday in July. Let me know what your availability is. I agree, for the sake of consolidation, having the workshop then lead into the meeting is probably the best of all worlds, but let's just make sure that it works for the most number of people in the most convenient way, and then we'll make a decision. Perfect. All right. Anything else on this topic or any other future considerations that anyone would like to raise?
Well, I have some project lists here. Do you want me to run through those or not?
No, I think that would be great. I just want to make sure everyone else were good on
Okay.
kind of putting a cap on. Okay, go ahead, John.
So the workshop, the OAO workshop, Trish is going to report back on that after she touched base with the commission, right? I got that right, Trish? Yeah, okay. Cane Creek preliminary plat we received. It has over 500 units in it. They're going to be having a development review in the first meeting in July. So we'll have the applicant come in and meet with us. We had a bit of a discussion with the DRT last week and just on the impacts that are there. There's two big, large impacts. And more than that, probably. One of them is there's a fair bit of fill brought in to raise the grading elevation to above the flood, out of the flood fringe, at least to establish minimum building elevations that are safe. That's over 8 feet of structural fill, quite a big impact on the site. And then the road development, which is a fairly significant investment. There's 203 condominium units, 267 townhouse units. The zoning is currently already in place, although there's some question about them pushing the envelope a bit. And the future development lots has got 102, single family lots 27. So quite a development. It's a little town if it's all built out. South Moab development, the current zoning is highway commercial. This is the project I was kind of touching on. It's bumping up against the HDHO provisions. It's sandwiched between the city boundary and the university. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that parcel there. It's got great potential. It's got services. It's got good access. The parcel is basically a green field, so there's no contamination or anything that's there. It looks like an interesting development as far as providing for long-term rental, both studio and single bedroom developments. So proposed is 125 units. They're currently within the current highway commercial, which is a funny way of designating residential development, has 56 units potentially within, has 56 units dedicated within the zoning, 18 dwelling units per acre. The building form is 4 stories, rental, single bedroom and studios, and we're looking at it in the DRT meeting in July. Thompson Springs, John Corkery came in, interesting fellow. We had an interesting discussion around a number of things. He's got almost a little village, mixed use village going on there. I'm not familiar with Thompson Springs, but I know a lot of you are. Trish was talking about. So he's got a number of things, including industrial mixed use request, a repair shop, a 3D printer that'll start printing out cabins, an overnight accommodation the bar and restaurant with some retail. And then he's going to redraft his concept plan. So lots of ideas.
Where was this at?
Thompson Springs. John Corkery. So it's where the bar, there's a bar and a hotel kind of there right now. He's got 12, I think, campground spots. And what else? I think there's a Quonset or at least an outbuilding that's on the site. I've not seen it, so. Okay, and the other one was an environmental learning center, kind of on the east side of Castle Valley. There's a bit of a wash or a creek in between this and a bit of a green buffer that's there. Tom Reese and Jory were in to kind of talk about this. They'll be presenting this at the DRT. They seem really excited about it. It's mainly meant for educational, I would call it educational institutional purpose. It would fit into a conditional use permit within the range of grazing zone. And potentially 100 students with educational facilities and accommodation facilities on site, but basically self-contained. Not that they need anything off-site, and nor is there any retail or any other commercial residential use. So those are the 4 quick updates.
Wonderful. All right, well, we have a lot of homework and a lot to do in the next few weeks. Any final thoughts? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Emily, could you stick around for a minute after everybody leaves? I got a couple of questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
All right, motion by Garish,
Second.
seconded by Bob, all in favor. Lovely. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, John. We're so glad you could join us, and Trish, and we
You're
look forward to seeing you all in a couple weeks.